Just want to say a few things about this awful news from France tonight. Savage Islamist attack um, in the town of Conflans and Saint Honorine, which is 25 kilometers west of Paris. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. A history teacher was stabbed and decapitated in front of his school, um, and the attacker was shot dead by police. Um, President Macron has called this an Islamist terror attack, um, and the Interior Minister has set up a terror crisis center. This was, yeah, Interior Minister Jared Darmanin said he had set up a crisis center to deal with the attack. So I don't know if they're expecting other attacks or if it seems this was a single incident. Um, Now, apparently, this history teacher had shown his students pictures of the Prophet Muhammad, and he taught about freedom of expression. He was a history teacher. That's obviously a very big part of French history. Um, there's no other details, for example, on the name or the age of the victim, but um, it's just staggering to think that we're now in the third decade of the 21st century, and a teacher in a Western nation can be decapitated. It just blows the mind. But then in France, of course, this is a country that's no stranger to Islamic extremism. Um, the information that seems to be available at the moment suggests that the attacker was 18-year-old of Chechen descent. Whether he was a student or a friend of students, I don't know. But this just shows the cancer of Islamist ideology that has penetrated into France. Not long ago, there was a young woman who had to move school because of the death threats that she received. Um, it's very sad, but it's scary as well. It's scary to think that there is such extreme mindsets out there that can think that this is justified. And what I find more infuriating than terrorists themselves, because they usually are what they are. What I mean by that is they tend to be pretty upfront about their views. You can, you can tell a mile off that they're extremists. The people we really need to watch out for is the apologists. So there was a guy from Pakistan on the BBC News link, and his comment went as follows: I don't support any kind of violence, but when you offend a large number of people, what do you expect? So this Muslim guy was trying to make moral equivalency between offence and extreme violence. And sadly, that sort of mentality is quite widespread among a lot of apologists for this sort of attack. And I just find it utterly hard to comprehend. I mean, not unbelievable because similar things have happened in France in recent years. Um, there was, of course, the elderly. I'm just looking at the screen right now, in fact, in a screenshot, in fact, of something. Um, yeah, a few years ago, the elderly priest who was beheaded, also in France. This is a country that has really been plagued by Islamic extremism, arguably more so than any other Western country. And I've no words. I don't think you could ever get through to someone who thinks such an attack is justified. But like I say, the real danger is actually those who put on a vein of moderation where they'll condemn it, but then they'll go on to say, get into whataboutery. If you think that there is any rational comparison between being offended and extreme violence, your moral compass is totally skewed. I find it infuriating that there are Muslims who think that there is such a comparison, because supposedly the Prophet's image shouldn't be shown in Islam, but Um, there's just no where do you even go with that? But consider that we live in a world where in countries like Pakistan, people can be lynched and murdered over perceived insults to Islam. There's no free speech so far as Islam is concerned under Islamic theocracies. Um, there's no free speech to criticize religion. So my point would be, if Islam is so great, why does it need such stringent laws to protect it? Can we stop with the propaganda that Islam is a religion of peace, because it very clearly isn't? And it's not good enough to say, oh well, there's peaceful Muslims, so that proves it. Yeah, there's peaceful Muslims. There's also violent Muslims, and there's intolerant Muslims. I'm sick and tired of the political correctness that we see over this, and I have to say, so-called progressives who look at an incident like this, they condemn it, they say it's awful, faults with the family, but they will not name the ideology. I think their cowardice is part of the problem, and I don't say that lightly. I do believe it is moral cowardice to see a problem and not to acknowledge it, because they think if they name Islamic extremism, that's somehow bigoted against Muslims. The Liberal Democrats, the Labour Party, a chunk of the Conservative Party, I'm afraid they're all in this trap. I'm afraid that, with a few exceptions, there are still too many Democratic leaders that are reticent about speaking out on this. I don't see Joe Biden doing it. Donald Trump does. Emmanuel Macron does. But there aren't many leaders that are very vocal about the nature of pan-Islamist extremism. And you get the likes of Hope Not Hate, which is an organisation that I feel has no credibility on the grounds that they're not consistent. They condemn far right extremism. When it comes to things like this, they're silent. And this may have happened in France, but it could happen in Britain. Our Islamist problem may be not quite as pronounced, but it doesn't mean that it's non existent. Um, and I just think that the apologists and the enablers and the politically correct cards who refuse to talk about this problem, or who find it uncomfortable to talk about it, the sort of people who call themselves progressives, but as soon as you mention Islamic extremism, they say, "Oh, it's dog whistle. It's you're pandering to the far right." They infuriate me, quite frankly, and I've known a few personally. People who always come out with, "Oh, well, what about the far right?" The far right's the problem, but the evidence shows that the number of violent attacks that they perpetrate is far less than the number of Islamist attacks that Western Europe has seen in recent years. Both are a problem. We don't beat Islamic extremism by endorsing far right extremism, but Islamic extremism is clearly a far bigger problem. And we need to, I don't think you can tackle a problem without naming the ideology. It's all very well saying it's a terrorist attack, which it is, but you need to know the ideology behind it in order to tackle it. Because there's a difference between a terrorist attack that's motivated by religious extremism or political extremism versus, say, a rampage killing, which could just be a personal dispute between the killer and his family. Still awful, but it's a different kind of attack. Um, but honestly, today's regressive fools, I don't think they should be called progressives. I'm talking about people. And I'm not even talking about Muslims here. I think a lot of Muslims are in denial about the problem, frankly, especially those from countries like Pakistan, which is intensely religious. But even I'm not even just talking about Muslims here. I think there are non-Muslim so-called liberals who feel uncomfortable about talking about it. They somehow think it is pandering to the far right. If the far right does rise, it's because of the silence of liberals, so-called liberals. One of the main reasons I no longer wanted to support the Liberal Democrats is I felt they no longer stood up for human rights. I felt that they put political correctness above human rights, and there's evidence of that. For example, when they suspended a councillor a council candidate because he said little girls shouldn't be wearing the hijab. Oh no, that was politically incorrect. We'd better get rid of him. So, as far as I'm concerned, the Liberal Democrats, the Labour Party, Starmer hasn't done anything so far that indicates it's going to be much different in this regard. I mean, at least he hasn't praised terrorists the way Corbyn did, and he's more of a centrist figure. But I really want to see Keir Starmer say the words Islamic extremism. Any politician that fails to do that isn't paying attention. I mean, this shows no end in sight. This happens every few months in France. Something similar. There's an Islamist attack. This is one of the worst I've heard about, but it's by no means unique. And sadly, it will happen again. I think that anyone who shows an inkling of Islamist thinking needs to be, if they're not a French or a British citizen, they need to be deported immediately to whatever country they came from, regardless of the consequences. It's their problem, even if it means going back to a country where they could, be tucked in prison. If they are a security threat to our societies, we cannot gamble with that. And if they are a British citizen, I would seriously think about charging them with high treason. There must be legislation in place that can look at all sorts of things: conspiracy to commit terrorist acts, glorifying terrorism. Yes, we need to get a balance of freedom of expression, but we have to recognize that Islamist ideology is incompatible with Western liberal democracy. And my message to Western Muslims is you could defend your religion, but you have to accept that Islam is not above criticism. If your position is Islam cannot be criticized, I say go to Pakistan, go to a country, Iran, which will endorse your way of thinking, even if you're not from there, because you're going to be happier there. People say, oh, that's racist. You can't say that. I'm sick and tired of cardly political correctness. And I think it's despicable, actually, because human rights has to trump sensitivities on religion. Then you get people like the SNP minister, whose name temporarily eludes me, but he wanted to bring in legislation that would make it harder to criticize Islam. And he's not calling it blasphemy legislation. Ostensibly, it was to roll back on Scotland's archaic and barely used blasphemy laws, but when you actually look at the small print, any legislation that's designed to protect religion needs to be treated with extreme caution. Well, religion shouldn't be protected. Individuals, yes, not religion. And it's these sort of laws that really, really need to be forcefully opposed. But this is one reason why I can't endorse. I have too many policy differences with the Tories, but it's one reason why I don't fully endorse Labour or the Liberal Democrats. I still don't believe that they are really motivated to speak out about Islamic extremism. I still think there is too much regressive thinking in both parties. The SNP, needless to say, the Greens, but in terms of national parties, sadly, there is not many voices in politics that is willing to say this is a problem. This is a problem that needs to be addressed candidly. Remember, after the Paris attack, Andrew Neil, who's leaving the BBC soon, made a very blunt statement, his own thoughts on, as he called them, Islamist losers. Frankly, we need more blunt talking. When politicians and when others talk about it was a terrorist attack, we need to combat extremism. That's really just an easy way to get out of saying it's Islamic extremism. The problem here is Islamic extremism. We can't ban Islam, that can't be done, but because it just can't be practically done. But I do think we should take a harder line on Islamic thinking, frankly, Islamist thinking. There should be zero laws protecting Islam, and we need to forcefully challenge this crazy idea that if you question Islam, you somehow hate Muslims. It's it's a perverse idea, in fact. We also need to forcefully challenge those people who try to make moral equivalencies, because Muslims who want to make moral equivalencies on this between offence and extreme violence are the same people who would support blasphemy laws in countries like Pakistan, whilst they simultaneously do, oh, we denounce terrorism. That is the most meaningless thing that anyone, terrorists denounce terrorism. It's meaningless. You have to recognize the ideology. And the simple reality is Islamic extremism is a threat to the world. It's incompatible with the modern world.